It is like something, isn't it, that you would have read in a novel or in what's seen in a film, in one of those sort of mocked up TV studio headlines that you get. But this is real, and it is easy to become normalised and inured to it. But there is not a word wasted there, not a word that is not in some way extraordinary, remarkable, incredible, unbelievable. But it is where we are. And if you think and take the long view, the longue durée of the Trump presidency and his candidacy, all the way back going to 2015, when it started, you remember so much that is so easy to forget, such as the kind of morass, the endless spew of norm-breaking, rule-busting, convention-defying elements that is Trump, the man, the politician, and the president, all the way back in 2015, where he basically accused entirely erroneously, entirely incorrectly, entirely wrongly, knowingly so, that the then president, President Obama, was not really born in the United States, legitimizing a racist, deeply, deeply racist trope. Right through to the present day, Trump has stress-tested the American political, the American media, the American general political system. Time after time after time. Normally, particularly with regards to the Republican Party, it has been found wanting. And now it is the rule of law itself, the bedrock, the basis of any democracy, and certainly the American democracy and the American Republic, which Trump will now stress test for his own purposes. And the election in November will now, of course, was always going to be to some extent a referendum on Joe Biden, the incumbent president. It always was going to be. It always is. To some extent, it was going to be unusual because it would also be a referendum once again on the Trump presidency, which has passed. Because, of course, it is so long since the American political system has thrown up a former president running for the presidency again. You have to go all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt to do that. All the way back to the 1950s to see a rematch when you had Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson. But this is completely unique and different as well because there will be something else on the ballot paper. And the thing on the ballot paper will be whether you, as an American voter, choose to believe in the rule of law, the justice system, the verdict that has been delivered by the jury, men and women in New York, or you believe and endorse the analysis of Donald Trump and many of his supporters, which is that the this particular trial and court was rigged and was a witch hunt against him. That is as dramatic as it is. I can't really think of a presidential backdrop that could be more dramatic. And that is where we are this morning. And America, already a deeply polarized, already a deeply, deeply jeopardized society in some ways in terms of the stability of its political system. We've seen that play out again and again, all the way back, reaching its climax in a way on January the 6th, 2021. But it is going to find itself, those divisions, those fissures, prized open, I think, like never before. Petrol poured on the fire that is American democracy and as it has been in recent years. I want to talk to you about what you think about this trial, what it means for Trump, whether you agree with him that it is a witch hunt, and there are ways in which he can suggest that it is. He can point to the fact that the judge was a Democrat. He can point to the fact it took place in Manhattan, where there were very few supporters of his and so on. I think all of those arguments are pretty bogus, but he and his supporters will doubtless be able to do so. Do you think that it is a witch hunt, or do you think it is time for British politicians in particular, including even our prime ministerial candidates, to make it clear that actually a convicted felon is someone who is no good for the West, no good for the world, no good for NATO, and so on? 0345 6060 973, 0345 6060 973, text 84850. First, let's talk to a man who really knows about Donald Trump, and that is, of course, John Sopel, presenter of the global podcast News Agents and News Agents USA. John, thanks so much for coming on the show this morning. It couldn't be more dramatic, could it?
No, and I was watching last night, and it was a core blimey moment when I was watching US TV, and the first kind of the presenter in the studio says, first count, guilty, count two, guilty, count three, and you go, oh my word. And, it really was hairs on the back of your neck standing up, because having, covered Donald Trump for all the years that he was president, he's always sort of managed to defy gravity in some way. And here, being judged by 12 of his peers, he has been found guilty of this charge of false accounting over the $130,000 that was paid to a porn star. It means he is a convicted felon. And just to let me just paint an absurdity. I mean, it probably won't happen, almost certainly won't, but potentially now could. On July the 11th, Donald Trump returns to court for sentencing. It could be that the judge will say, you are going to prison now. The following week is the Republican convention in Milwaukee, when it should have been the crowning glory of Donald Trump winning the Republican nomination. And he might be absent because he is behind bars at a penitentiary somewhere. This is extraordinary.
And we should make it clear, just in case people are sat there thinking, well, surely this must mean that this is the end of his presidential run, as it would be for, for example, if, obviously it was not going to happen in any way, I'm not suggesting it would, but let's just imagine somehow that Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer found themselves convicted or part of a trial or something like that. That would be the end of them in terms of them becoming Prime Minister. That's not the case for Donald Trump necessarily.
Yeah, Lewis, I sat there and watched this last night, and I don't know about you. I know you were in a TV studio when this was all unfolding as well last night. But I kind of had this sense of dissonance, that I had two completely contradictory thoughts, although they sort of complement each other. One was, this is history. This is epoch-defining. This is a moment never to be forgotten. This changes everything. And simultaneously thinking, will this make a jot of difference at all to the US presidential election? You know, when we get a change in interest rates and you expect the stock market to react, and the stock market doesn't move an inch, it's because it's already been baked in that people thought there would be a kind of fall in interest rates. And it's just the same with Donald Trump, that you sense that this is going to make absolutely no difference whatsoever to the calculations of Republican voters who want to support Donald Trump. They kind of think it's a witch hunt. They think it's all a hoax. They think it's a weaponized justice system. They think it's all got up by Joe Biden, and they're going to stick with their man. All I would say to that, and you kind of elegantly put it in your introduction, is a man went on trial. He faced criminal charges. He chooses not to take the stand to defend himself against those charges. A jury retires to consider its verdict. A jury returns a verdict of guilty. That is American justice in action.
Yep.
It's not about whether it was in Manhattan or Wisconsin or Milwaukee, wherever it could have been.
Yep.
It's just that is how the justice system works. And, was it a conservative judge or a liberal judge? Well, judges get appointed in America on very different grounds to the ones that we would think as normal in the UK. They do get appointed by Republican presidents or Democrat presidents. And so there is a bit more politics in the way the judiciary works in America. But that's the American system of justice.
Yeah, completely. And I suppose if we, again, thinking about the sort of British example, and it's sort of instructive thinking about if we had a similar thing in the UK, isn't it? Which is that if we did have a prime ministerial candidate who, for whatever reason, found himself convicted or even charged or whatever it happened to be, I think it's fair to say that in terms of both the Labour and Conservative parties, that would put profound strain on the relationship of that particular candidate with their party. And I think most of the party elites, and you could say there are some parallels with what happened to Boris Johnson, most of the party elites in both cases would probably come out against them. But of course, as we know, you might think, listening to this, that the Republican Party would distance themselves now from Trump because he's not officially their candidate yet. But as we know, time and time again, if we know one thing about Donald Trump and the Republican Party, it's his party now, and they're not going to do that.
So what I think is happening in the Republican Party, and look, I think a lot of this will be driven by what happens in the polls over the next few weeks to see whether it does dent Donald Trump's popularity. But what it seems to me is that at the moment, you have got a Republican Party that between them do not have a spine. They are terrified of Donald Trump, of the menace that he can cause, of, Trump goes after them on social media or whatever. And so they prefer the quiet life than taking Donald Trump on. But what's happening is at the moment, you're getting all these people in public saying, I stand right behind Donald Trump. This is a witch hunt. This is a weaponized justice system, blah, 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 blah. And on they go. Whereas behind cupped hands, they'll tell reporters, they'll tell people like me and you, well, it would obviously be much, much better for the party were he to stand down and if we could get someone else there. The question is, when are they ever going to find a scintilla of courage to say that to his face? because then you could end up in a very different place. And if the poll numbers start to crash, if there are further question marks about Trump's temperament and his judgment and what he's doing, and look, he has come out of this looking demeaned. He doesn't look Mr. Macho Man that he likes to present himself as. He looks tired.
I thought he looked completely
shrunken.
defeated last night, John, didn't you?
Yeah, completely. And he just sat in court, apparently, absolutely didn't move a muscle, just sat there, kind of almost, paralyzed by what was happening. So, whilst it is perfectly possible, what I said initially, that this doesn't make a jot of difference, it is possible. This is not nothing either.
No.
This is a moment that is now fluid, and we don't know the way this is going to land. All I would say is that for all the years that I've covered Donald Trump and thought, well, he can't survive this one, he can't survive that one, whether it be the tapes from Access Hollywood, whether it be his remarks about John McCain, that he was not a hero because he was taken as a prisoner of war, all those things that you thought this is going to sink him, and somehow he stays flying. I hesitate to say this is the end of Donald Trump, but this is a moment, and although that he is, his words are defiance at the moment, he will be raging inside and he will feel terror about what unfolds next.
How do you think, John, Biden's going to handle it? Because it's been interesting so far, right? Biden's kept it and tried to keep it as much of a distance as he can, because he's been aware that obviously if he's seen to get involved in any way, that will just play into the argument of Trump and the Republicans that it's a politicized process and weaponized the justice system. But of course, how do the Republicans and Trump are all going to be, narrating this as a witch hunt, as a corrupt practice? How do the Democrats handle it? Because there has to be an alternative narrative, doesn't there?
Yeah, and there are an awful lot of people in the White House who are saying to Joe Biden, we've got to be more aggressive about this. And it was telling that, and it wasn't accidental, that in the final days of the trial this week, Robert De Niro pitches up outside the court representing the Biden-Harris ticket, and there to say, Donald Trump is not a fit person to be the president of the United States of America. That was all very, very deliberate and done with a purpose in mind to try to take the fight to Donald Trump over this case. I think, exactly as you say, Lewis, I think that's what you have a vice president for, and that's why you have attack dogs in Parliament as well. You have other people who do the dirty work. And I think that Biden will want to try and somehow stay above it and just say how deeply regrettable that my political opponent for the president is a convicted felon, and but not revel in it.
Do you think he'll debate him, John? I mean, because
that's another point. There is. So if we just look at the calendar, we're at the end of May now. June the 27th is the first televised debate.
Crazy.
Does Biden just say, you know what? I am not going to debate and dignify a convicted felon. Yeah. It's perfectly possible that Biden would say, you know what, I'm sorry, I won't debate you now. But I think that the process will go on and others will try to frame the argument because, for all that Donald Trump is ill-disciplined and chaotic and noisy and kind of, impetuous, his messaging has had laser-like focus about this whole narrative that this case should have never come to trial. It's all got up. It's all a weaponized justice system, that the judge is compromised, that, and on and on and on. He has been saying that every day consistently to his base. That is what he wants the base to take out. And his base, the Trump core support, is absolutely rock.